What's up, Packer fans? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. We had a fairly interesting day in Packerland on Tuesday with some roster cuts, a trade, a acquisition via free agent wire. So plenty to talk about, but I think what's on top of everyone's mind, of course, is the trade of Josh Jackson for corner Isaac Yiadom. And yes, I did my research on the enunciation or pronunciation or whatever you want to call it for Isaac's last name. So it's Yiadom, Yeah-Dum is how you pronounce it, apparently. So Isaac Yiadom is your newest Green Bay Packer. We'll get to more of a, kind of scouting report breakdown for Isaac in just a minute, but this is something, obviously, with the Josh Jackson trade that we had discussed right here on the podcast of a potential change of scenery trade for Josh Jackson. The writing was on the wall every once in a while. And listen, for everyone that covers the team and everyone that does a tremendous job. We're trying to put the puzzle pieces together as best as possible to give you guys kind of the analysis on what's happening and what we expect to happen. But there's always going to be some bends and some curves that you simply just don't expect. Malik Taylor last year, right? Getting that sixth and final wide receiver spot a year ago. I don't think anyone saw that coming. Chris Barnes getting released, really being outplayed in camp by everyone's, frame of reference by Kamal Martin. Kamal Martin gets hurt. Chris Barnes gets cut, then Chris Barnes gets re-signed during the week and then starts week one. There's just things from time to time that no matter how close to the team you are, you just can't see coming. There's just things that the team keeps close to the vest. At times they will hide players, so other teams maybe aren't as interested in things like that. So it's very tough to glean those sort of things. But every once in a while, something begins to be so glaringly, painstakingly obvious that the writing is on the wall and it's time for a change and it's just not going to work. And that was clearly the case with Josh Jackson. Anyone that was watching that game on Saturday could watch Jackson and feel like this was the nail in the coffin scenario for him, right? Everyone, myself included, wanted to believe in the talent that was Josh Jackson. The ball skills that he exhibited in college at Iowa, the playmaking ability, the ability to change the game, like those are things that you just can't teach. But you have to put yourself in a position to make those plays. And with Josh Jackson, let's just put it this way, right? As a defensive back, at any position in the NFL, you either have to win with athleticism, like just pure unadulterated athleticism, or you need to win. If you don't have that athleticism, if you don't have that pure raw advantage, you better be able to win with technique. And the truth of the matter is that Josh Jackson never had the pure foot quickness or the raw athleticism to be able to just play without the technique, and he never learned the technique. It ultimately comes down to something as simple as that. It didn't matter who his defensive backs coach was. Jerry Gray comes in. You have this very talented corner, but just never able to put it together. And again, when you have given him 3 seasons to develop, this is now his 4th season, former top 50 pick. You've tried him at outside corner, inside corner, safety, punt returner, special teams, everything that you can possibly try him at. And he just doesn't succeed at it, and it doesn't catch on. And in your very first preseason game, and what he had to have known was a make or break offseason for him, at least as a member of the Packers, but quite frankly, probably as an NFL player, a make or break offseason. His first game against the Texans, against the likes of, Tyrod Taylor and Davis Mills and a bunch of mostly garbage time wide receivers, they absolutely have their way with Josh Jackson. And it's completely unacceptable. And that's why Josh Jackson is gone. And again, it was one of those moments that everyone in the press box, everyone watching at home, everyone just knew. And I'm not dogging Josh Jackson here, right? Like it's a tough gig. And I get that there's a certain connotation and pressure that comes with being a top 50 pick and a second round pick and all those sort of things. And there's times it just doesn't work out. Josh Jackson's not going to be the first second round pick that doesn't work out for the Packers or any other team. And he certainly wasn't the first. He won't be the last, but disappointing nonetheless, because I remember on draft day, there were a lot of people on draft day that thought that Josh Jackson could potentially be the Packers' first round pick. And when the Packers at pick 45 were able to get Jackson, I remember doing a live draft show and Ross Uglum was freaking the heck out, and a bunch of other people on the draft pod and everyone on Packers Twitter was freaking out that Josh Jackson fell to Green Bay at 45. They had already picked Jair, of course, and this looked like, finally Green Bay was going to have their corner tandem. Josh Jackson, if I remember correctly, has a pick six in preseason. If I remember correctly, in that one of the first games, I think it was the first game, gets the fumble recovery in the end zone for a touchdown. It looked like the playmaking was going to stay, and then it just never did. So unfortunately, things didn't work out for Josh Jackson. That's where we are. The Packers decide to do the classic change of scenery trade, and all the time you hear fans of like, this player stinks, trade him. This player stinks, trade him. Well, if he stinks and he stinks, you're not going to get much in return. The Packers in turn get somebody who in all likelihood the New York Giants were going to release as well. And this is simply hey, we're going to release Isaac, we're going to release Josh. Instead of both releasing them, these are both 25-year-old players, coming out of the 2018 draft, top 100 draft picks. Let's swap them for each other. You can have a look at Josh. We'll take a look at Isaac. We'll see if maybe we can get somebody to stick on either one of our rosters. But it's a free look at a 25-year-old top 100 pick for 2 weeks. And in all likelihood, if I were a betting man today, I would say that Josh Jackson is unlikely to make the Giants' final roster, and that Isaac Yiadom is unlikely to make the Packers' final roster. So more on Isaac in just a moment. We'll get to that scouting report, but that was not the only move that Green Bay made on Tuesday. Of course, I can gladly tell you, or honestly tell you, I did not get any of my predictions right with who I expected Green Bay to potentially move on from. But definitely, Green Bay makes a couple interesting moves in putting both DeAndre Tompkins and Isaac Yiadom on IR. Both will eventually, in all likelihood, end up with injury settlements and off the team at some point, which again is something that will cost against the salary cap for Green Bay, and really disappointing for both. I do believe, as I mentioned yesterday, that Isaac Yiadom at least was in a competition for at least. He worked his way into being known enough that just maybe he could have made the final roster as a tight end and was making his mark a little bit. Again, best blocking tight end on the roster besides Mercedes Lewis, and really had a really nice camp up to this point. So would he have made the final roster? I tend to doubt it, but he wasn't far off, and he was having a really nice camp. Maybe he ends up being a practice squad player for them. Maybe he ends up getting called up at some point during the season, but to get to play, to be placed on IR, certainly a disappointment for him. And the same thing for DeAndre Tompkins. Go back and watch preseason game 1 again, and watch how early DeAndre Tompkins gets on the field. Now, that's not always a tell-all of how they feel about a player, but he gets in before Beggleton and a few of the other wide receivers on the roster. So I genuinely think that they liked him, and he's made some big catches. He just caught a big pass from Jordan Love in practice late last week. So he's made some plays, and I genuinely think they liked him. Now, as a 53-man guy, no, but I wholeheartedly believe that he was lined up for a practice squad spot. Obviously, now being on IR, that will not happen. And again, for those who aren't totally familiar with the rules, you go on IR at this point in the season, there is no bringing those players back. So they are on IR. The only thing that can happen is you can work out an injury settlement with them, at which point later in the season, you could potentially bring them back at some point. But to begin with, they have to go on IR, and then you have to release them and allow other teams to have the opportunity to claim them first and things like that if you release them off of IR. So either way, Yiadom and Tompkins both go on IR. The other move is that they release second-year player Zach Johnson. Zach is another player who, when I watched him last year in camp, to me, he was like the 89th, 90th guy on the roster. Made some progress, didn't look as overwhelmed as he was a season ago, but with a lot of undrafted free agents, all the 5 now, offensive linemen that they drafted over the last 2 seasons, a ton of starters and depth players, Ben Braden really working his way up. Now Royce Newman's in that conversation. You still got a Lucas Patrick, you just bring in Dennis Kelly. There's a lot of depth and talent on this offensive line, and just not enough room left for Zach Johnson. And the writing was on the wall there too. Probably should have maybe seen that one coming a little bit more. But Zach Johnson finds his way out as well. We'll see if he can find another team in the coming days. So Josh Jackson traded, Isaac Yiadom to IR, DeAndre Tompkins to IR, Zach Johnson released. Then later in the day, we find out via Ian Rappaport that Jake Dolegala is going to be re-signed for this week. So when he gets re-signed, the Packers need to make another move. Late on Tuesday, Bill Huber reported that the move there is that the Packers are going to be releasing Stanford Samuels when they bring on Dolegala. So Samuels will be gone. Dolegala will come in, provide insurance this week at quarterback for the Packers. Should Jordan Love not be able to play, you obviously don't want to go into the game with just Kurt Benkert. You want another quarterback on the roster. It made all the sense in the world that brings somebody in that at least spent some time in OTAs and minicamp, that at least has some semblance of knowledge with the playbook and things like that. So this made sense as soon as the injury to Jordan Love was announced. Hopefully, I don't think this is a nail in the coffin for Jordan Love not playing this week. I think it just gives Green Bay some insurance that if they want to be cautious with Jordan or maybe play him less or not play him at all, they don't go into this game with just Kurt Benkert. They have another option available to them. So those were all the roster moves that happened on Tuesday. Let's go over a quick scouting report and breakdown of Isaac Yiadom in case, and I'm assuming most of you are not familiar with him. 25 years old, 6'1" cornerback out of Boston College, now the third player that they have out of Boston College currently on the roster, along with A.J. Dillon and Isaiah McDuffie. Was drafted by Denver in 2018, third round pick, 99th overall, so a top 100 pick. He was traded to the Giants last year for a 7th round pick. So he's started 19 games total, and he started 10 just last year for the Giants. So he's played in, not only, played in games, but he's started games in the NFL, 19 total, 10 last season. However, has allowed a career passer rating of 113.2. So when quarterbacks target him, he's given up 113.2 passer rating, which is obviously not great. Now, on the plus side, he's played almost 500 total special team snaps in his career so far. So we talk about the job description for that number 6 cornerback position. Special teams is 1A, and Isaac Yiadom has almost 500 total snaps of special teams in his career. So that's going to be something that could potentially help him make this roster. He has a RAS score. If you're not familiar with RAS, it's just your relative athletic score at the position that you play. So as a corner, he has a RAS score of 6.14. So he's in the 62nd percentile as an athlete for cornerbacks. Nothing special about any of his numbers, 4.5, 640. Nothing else was really that noteworthy. At an okay 3 cone, some things like that. Had a really bad bench press coming out of college, and that kind of shows up with his tackling from time to time. If you're looking for a bright side, last week against the Jets, actually, he'll play the Jets now 2 weeks in a row, but he played against the Jets last week with the Giants, had 6 targets per Pro Football Focus, gave up only 1 catch for 9 yards. So, if you're looking for a bright spot, maybe things are starting to click a little bit for him in his 4th season. Obviously, that's a lot better than Josh Jackson did a week ago. So at least Green Bay's getting the player who played better in their first preseason game this season. If he does make the roster, he's going to count $970,000 against the cap this season. And again, the big thing against him here is he will be an unrestricted free agent next year. So he'll have no team control going into 2022. So this is a 1-year player if he were to make the team. And again, that's why players like Kadar Hallman, KB Anento, those type of players will have an advantage over him because they have controllable seasons left, and both of them make less money than Yiadom would as well. So I definitely don't think that it's a foregone conclusion in any way, shape, or form that Yiadom makes the team. In fact, if I were betting today, I would say it's more likely than not that he doesn't. But Green Bay basically gets a free look at a former 3rd-round pick, 25-year-old player, played pretty decent a week ago. They'll bring him in. He has special teams experience, and he's going to compete with Kadar Hallman and KB Anento for that number 6 cornerback spot in all likelihood. If you're looking for a scouting report on him coming out of college, here was Lance Zierlein from NFL.com. This was his scouting report. Yiadom looks long and lean, but he plays with adequate strength in disrupting routes and has the aggressiveness to challenge and muddle the catch point. He's more aware than instinctive, but can handle both zone and press man responsibilities. Yiadom's special teams value may move him ahead of similar cornerbacks in this draft. His man coverage skills need more work, but he has the talent to go from backup to starter within a couple of seasons. So really astute scouting report from Zierlein. Everything happened, right? He's played a lot of special teams. He went from backup to starter. Hasn't necessarily been good, and some of those instinctual, issues that Zierlein caught on tape have really, manifested themselves so far in the NFL. So I think that's very astute observation by Zerline in his scouting report, and I think it's all kind of played out perfectly. If you look at his career thus far, the player that Zerline compared him to was former Packer Bashad Breeland, actually. So that was the comp that he had coming out of the draft. But again, Green Bay is going to have a nice look at a 25-year-old former third-round pick over the next coming weeks. One other note here, Matt Schneidman put out a 53-man roster prediction over on The Athletic. If you have a chance, make sure to go check it out. There's a pretty scathing take of Jace Sternberger in there, and he kind of went as far to say, unless he drastically improves, he is a long shot to make the roster. Now, he's suspended to start the season. He would miss the first 2 games. Green Bay basically gets to stash him on the roster for free. As I've mentioned in the past, it's almost like a bonus when you have a suspended player like that who's not an integral player to the team. But it sounds like it in what Matt put in his article as well. And again, make sure to check it out over at The Athletic. But it sounds like Green Bay may want to move on even before that based on where things are for Sternberger right now. So a rather scathing review of where Sternberger's roster potential lies at this point. And it sounds like, again, if Matt's correct, which I assume he is, Jace may not be long. And this could be another player that in the coming weeks could really be ripe for a change of scenery trade with some team across the league, some team who really valued him as a top 100 pick in the draft and thinks that they may be able to get more out of him than Green Bay did. We'll see. He just put that really nice catch on tape against the Texans last week. So you never know. Maybe Green Bay can get another player that they can kind of take a look at. But if Matt's right, we could be looking at maybe the last couple preseason games for Jace Sternberger as a member of the Green Bay Packers. That's going to do it for me today. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to be at Packers-Jets practice on Wednesday, today as you're listening to this. So I'll have a full breakdown of that practice on tomorrow's podcast here on YouTube. So again, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate you joining as always. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.